Saturday, the 14th of February. There's all this stuff that people have been talking about, that what Epstein was up to, who was connected to him, who was benefiting from it, who was involved in these horrific activities involving children and women and men and boys and girls. But there's another aspect to what he was up to, and that is just as toxic for humanity. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. Hey, Jamie, thank you so much for making yourself available. For
Hello.
this is a follow-up video to the one we did about how Trump is taking down the United Nations, or could be taking down the United Nations bit by bit. And this one is about this other aspect that of Epstein's activities, that project that ties into that first video.
hmm Yeah.
Okay, so, say more about that.
So what we spoke about was the role that foundations play in funding NGOs and legitimizing their policies through the United Nations. It's control and policy from above. It's not a democratic work pipe flow, if that's the right word to say. So we spoke about that in the last show in detail, and they rely on a certain amount of working in the shadows to operate. They are looking to kind of make sure nothing triggers suspicion against them or damages their moral authority or invites deeper scrutiny. They need to remain to function properly as a background player.
Who are these they?
We're talking about the foundations, talking
Okay.
about the Rockefeller Foundation, Gates Foundation, a myriad of foundations. There's about 10 core foundations that fund the UN, but then there's multiple foundations that fall into this system that fund NGOs and work with the NGO, with the United Nations indirectly. So it's a whole industry, a whole ecosystem of philanthropy, which arguably some of it is going to be good for the world, but a lot of it is anti-democratic. And I think what we're seeing now is the policies being driven by these foundations more and more.
Okay.
So the worst thing that could happen to them is something like the Epstein Files, because that directly exposes how they do business and how the elite's world works and how they think.
Okay. That was my question on my lips there. How does this tie in with Epstein? And what we're talking about, I'm just going to name it as the NGO industrial complex.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one.
Right. So I know one of the things that's come out of the Epstein files is how, was it 2015 or 2017, Gates and Epstein were in communication about profiting from pandemics.
hmm
Is
Yeah.
is that part of it or something, or an example of it?
Well, yeah, that's a that's a big one, isn't it? I think if we go back to my first time we spoke together, my first show, and I don't know if you can have links in the show notes or to them, but basically I brought up the ideology of the globalist ideology, which isn't really discussed and thought about much, of how they think and how they see us. And I think that's ultimately what these emails show. And part of this ideology is based around the idea of evolution. Through the Fabians, it was kind of eugenics, evolution in that way. Through theosophy, it's a spiritual evolution of humanity, which brought us the idea of Aryans and root races and all that type of stuff, as well as the UN. So for me, what struck me from Epstein's work was this direct relationship with academia, with big money, the foundations, and business. And I think that is really where the insights come into this. He was funding a program at Harvard called PED, which is an interesting abbreviation, isn't it?
An organization called PED
Yeah,
organization,
yeah.
PEDO.
I think they must have had a good little laugh about that one. But basically, that's a program of evolutionary dynamics. And it was Martin Nowak who was the rock star scientist that he funded into creating this discipline of science. So Epstein is really embedded into this academia kind of accredited kind of historical legacy now of being part of this program, which was like a game theory for evolution. And it's, in a nutshell, everything that Epstein was doing was based around this evolutionary and conforming conditioning of man, which to me is an example of that strain of the ideology absolutely alive and well amongst the elites. That eugenics is pretty much what has been unveiled in this in these documents. And obviously eugenics, biological eugenics, has been a kind of no-go zone since World War II. It's frowned upon massively.
Mm.
So for foundations to be exposed in funding it directly or indirectly, and the middleman of these foundations, perhaps he was an agent of the Rothschild dynasty, which I think is perhaps what I'm seeing as where he was operating as an agent for the Rothschilds, and which is the British arm of the Anglo sphere, I think. And there's evidence of money being moved between the Rothschilds regarding these subjects of genetic engineering, and basically directing the evolution of humanity is the United Nations goals, the Fabian's goals, and exactly what Epstein was doing in basically creating, communicating with scientists from CRISPR. Have you heard of CRISPR?
Yeah, this is a gene technology, like doing surgery on genes and manipulating DNA.
Well, I think the most famous case was there's a Chinese scientist that created the CRISPR babies and then was imprisoned because of doing so. That's quite a kind of well-known.
What are the CRISPR babies?
Well, they genetically created two children. I haven't looked into the details massively, but it was just more noting that he was. I'd heard about it, and I think it was during COVID that came to light, and it was a Chinese scientist, and I think he got imprisoned, but now he's been let out of prison. And these emails explore a kind of chorus of scientists and entrepreneurs who are very much pro designer baby creation. And there was one guy in particular, let me just get his name up here. I've got his Twitter account. Brian Bishop, who was tweeting frantically until January the 31st, until these allegations came out. And he's kind of gone quiet because he was in the emails talking about advanced processes of creating designer babies that Epstein was going to invest into and didn't have a problem investing into, but needed distance from it. It couldn't be traced back to him, obviously, because this was after he'd been come out of prison for his child abuse. So, really, that's kind of the revelation for me is that the elites are kind of very much thinking about the steering of evolution and the creating of the perfect human, which is kind of ties back into this kind of Fabian theosophical principles that the United Nations was born out of. So the whole thing really just brings into light what the desires are, is manufacturing a compliant population and ruling over them. And anything that threats that system is something that they're going to censor and work against, But to see the kind of email chains and how the money is being moved on these dark arts, if you like, the stuff that's outside of the realms of acceptability, and to have an insight into that, I think that is the biggest takeaway as proof that these globalists of what their kind of design is.
Right. Okay. So there's lots and lots and lots of evidence suggests that in those people moving in those circles are eugenicists and
Yeah.
the descendants or the carriers of that philosophy. And of course, they
Hmm.
can't do it publicly.
Hmm.
Can't have any politician or any, listen, I'm for eugenics, right? Vote for me and I'll kill you off. Can't be doing that publicly. So they got to do it behind the curtains and they got to be able to have plausible deniability. So then they're doing it through patsies like Epstein. Actually, not even a patsy because he's an active participant in this project, but
Hmm.
it allows them to create distance. And then he's got all these connections and he's building up all these connections between different agencies, different people, promoting different aspects of the eugenicist project.
Yeah.
And we're being distracted from that by having our attention on the horrific crimes against women and children that he was committing,
Hmm.
which then allowed him to get compromise on these people that he got connected to.
Hmm.
So then they get sucked into this eugenicist enterprise, even though they may not be necessarily minded to do so, but for the fact they're being blackmailed.
Yeah.
And
One
it,
thing that did strike me with the blackmailing, though, that Epstein, I mean, I don't think he ever thought that information was ever going to come out.
yeah.
Or he was the subject of a blackmailing because it's all his exposure of actually him, the blackmailer, that eventually came out. So was someone blackmailing him? I'm not saying that is the case. So
Mm.
we don't need to jump through those hoops, but it's always good to kind of keep that dialectical perspective open of uh, what are the effects of this information? We were talking about that before, of seeing these kind of people being exposed to this information as a real uh, demoralization campaign and a kind of um, a reduction of people's internal structures, their psychological structures of how they see the world are being smashed at the moment. I've seen people on social media kind of having breakdowns almost, and I think that is also a consequence of this, and whether that is
Jim,
something to consider or not.
that's a really, really good point. A friend of mine uh, a few days ago said to me how she couldn't watch the news anymore. She was just so upset with all this stuff coming out. It was just horrific and was
Mm.
just upset about it and down in the dumps about it. And like you said, demoralized. And I said to her, as an experienced child protection social worker, I said, look, here's another way of looking at it. This is really good news. This is really, really good news. Why is it good news? Well, how you stop abuse is you shine a light on it. How come abuse carries on is because it's not exposed to the light. And so it carries on in locked rooms and
Yes.
nobody knows and nobody's there to hear the cries of the victims or to help them out. So this is really good news that it's being exposed because it was happening anyway. But exposure stops it,
Mm. And it
hopefully.
comes to that moral relativeness again, that they be kind of laughing at us, going the Christian morality, which is when we talk about moral relativism, it's in a Christian perspective, that morals are generally seen as a Christian thing.
Mm,
And people who kind of can, uh, what's the word? People that can play with that moral relativism, that comes often from these kind of either can be Eastern belief systems that create a different moral framework, or these New Age frameworks that kind of create that really they've got us transfixed by the moral aspect of this, the abuse, where really the deeper story about it that is going to be getting suppressed, that they don't want, is this exposure on the darkness of this foundation system, and for people to rise up and be against that form of governance, against global governance and governance from the back door.
Right. Right. And listening to you, I'm thinking about the money flows, where the money flows to and from. And it's going into the NGO industrial complex, which is, as we discussed in the previous video, connected to the United Nations and these globalist entities that are putting in this supranational imperial structure of control, which is derived from the City of London. It's the British Empire redux done through soft power without us knowing it. And there are other money flows. So there's Trump stopping the NGO money flows to the UN. There's the money, the exposure of the release of the Epstein Files does a couple of things. One is it exposes these money flows and this other network of foundations of how these the eugenicist billionaires are pursuing their project. It also exposes Israel as being tied in with this because of Epstein's links with Mossad and Ehud Barak. And I'm just thinking here is what Israel was really, really good at, not that you and I approved, is enforcing take up of those novel medical interventions.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a strange one, that. You wouldn't
Yeah.
thought that, would you?
Yeah, so this state that was set up as purportedly set up as a reaction to the activities of Mengele and his philosophical partners is doing Mengele's work on the people that are supposed to be protected from that philosophy.
Exactly.
That
Exactly. It
was
was a
okay. That was weird, right? But it ties in with the whole eugenicist project. So that being exposed is good. And then there's a video I did with retired General Blaine Holt and ex-Green Beret Ian Burlingame and a few others that talked about this, that the other thing that Trump is doing is stopping the money flows from drug running and from
yeah.
trafficking of drugs. And which country was it that was using opium to terrorize another power and has got a track record of using drugs to destroy nations and peoples and make money from it? I wonder, and are they sourced from, is it the City of London again? Is it them again? You know, the fentanyl's a latter day opium war. And
Yeah.
there's the massive amounts of money and how it ties into banking through all those banking havens in the Caribbean. Money flowing
Have
into
you
the
ever
City of London.
seen the YouTube channel Billy Moore?
No.
He's a Scouse guy that's traveling around the country with a camera, interviewing kind of anyone, a lot of homeless people. But that we are seeing we are seeing a very similar situation in our own country right now. The poverty and desperation and the crack epidemic is, I think, all time. We are being demoralized, eaten from the inside out. We are having the same things done to us by our own governments.
Well, eventually,
deliberately.
yeah. Well, eventually, empires eat their own. You know, the way in India, the British set Muslim against Hindu, against Sikh, against Christian. Well, they're doing that in Britain. And then, you know, some of the films and images I've seen from rundown parts of the United States.
Yeah.
People off their heads on spice and homelessness and poverty and people living in cars and trucks.
It's death by despair is the biggest killer in America, and I think it's probably in the UK now.
Right.
But that is going to be a psychological operation on its own population.
Yeah, and there isn't a way out. We're not being offered a way out. Certainly not by the globalists and their puppets, like in Britain, making it virtually impossible for any small business to thrive and flourish. So you
Hmm.
can't have a future where you're going to create some wealth for yourself and your family because you're just going to
Hmm.
get taxed and taxed and taxed. And I think this week, just gone, Netherlands has announced that they're going to be putting in a tax on unrealized assets. So if you don't unrealize it, well, you're still going to have to pay a tax on it. So you're
Hmm.
going to have to let go of it in order to pay the tax.
Hmm. I think part of me has always kind of wondered if they're trying to kind of cause a civil war backlash because they've already kind of changed the history books to paint white people as the white devil narrative.
Mm,
And I think that's part of this kind of mythology. So when Hitler, um, post World War II, unified a very broken, disparate group of people in Germany. It was like different cultures and provinces and everything. And through mythology, he created this kind of unification, which is what the United Nations is using mythology to create that kind of unification as well. But there's a kind of there's a bad guy in that scenario. And again, with this moral relativism, Judeo-Christian values in theosophy is where Hitler sought to kind of exterminate the Jews, was based on the justification of Blavatsky's writings. But it wasn't just Jews; it was the Anglo. It was basically Judeo-Christian values because Jesus was a Jew.
mhm.
So it wasn't fascism, and Hitler wasn't pro-Christianity. It wasn't like a Christian movement, how it's typecast by some people. It was this new age movement that was looking to eradicate those values, which is where you kind of, which is what's happening with us now with the drop of these documents. Our values are being kind of broken or enforced depending on how people react. But what we're being shown is that all these Hollywood heroes that everyone's got are kind of have no morals, basically. So you need to abandon your Christian morals and join the new age of everything's okay, and you're just a map if you're that way inclined. It's just a sexual preference, and that's how they
Well,
view it.
yes, that's really great because that leads us to owning nothing, eating bugs, and being happy. The future is bright.
Mm.
Well, actually, where the future is bright or brighter is with the American system of political economy, where nations get to create wealth for themselves and be independent and be sovereign, which in a way
Mm.
is the work that you do to promote that vision for humanity, sovereignty, resilience, community, decentralization. And therefore, it's really, really important to be able to see and look beyond the curtain, look beyond the pretense of they're doing it for our own good
Mm.
and all the other lies they tell. Jamie, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate you coming back on. I look forward to having you back on again at some time soon. Uh, please subscribe, comment, like. Thank you for watching, and let us know what you liked about this particular conversation or what you found useful. This is Rich and Jamie signing out. All the best. Bye bye.